Hey guys, it's Mark again, and today we're going to be doing a gear review on my 1991 Fender J.A.M. So a little bit about this amp I have. I got it a few months ago from my buddy Kyle. For those of you who don't know, not only is Kyle a very good friend of mine, but he's been the vocalist I've had the pleasure of working with for the past 6 years. He moved out of town a few months ago and found this amplifier for free at a yard sale. They just gave it away. So he thought he could use it as a vocal practice amp, but realized it was a guitar amp instead. So he gave it to me. And little did I know, I was receiving a little piece of Fender history that day. This amp is circa 1991, has long since been discontinued, but it's really cool. It's got a lot of unique features to it, a lot of vintage appointments. So let's take a look at it real quick. All right, so the first thing that you may notice about this amp, it was the first thing that I noticed, and I kind of found it odd, is that like there's no Tolex on this amp at all. This is just like a layer of thin carpet, and that strikes me as unique. You don't see this on amplifiers at all. So that was the first thing that struck my mind, is kind of odd, but it's actually really cool. Really cool texture. Now onto the front panel of this thing. Just like a lot of vintage amplifiers, you have two different inputs. You have a high gain input for high gain, high output pickups and guitars, and this is for a lower input for a more vintage type setting. You'll see this on a lot of old amps, like a lot of Marshall amps from like the 70s and the 80s. They had a few different input switches that kind of changed the way the sound was. So I think that's kind of cool. It's definitely a throwback. Another thing that you're going to see that's kind of interesting is like it's got individual channel switching. This thing has no foot switch. It's not foot switch compatible. It's definitely a hardwired piece of machinery. And so you've got 4 different modes this amp goes into, 2 different channels. You have the clean channel, which is a bright channel. I'm going to demo all these for you. The bright channel is like what I would consider an American clean, like the old Fender vintage, reverbs, the nice jazz choruses from the 60s and 70s. So that's kind of like your American clean. And the full clean kind of takes on like that plexi type sound, more British type sound. That's Marshall and Vox are kind of known for their bottom end. So that's going to have a little more bottom end, a little more warmth, and it's pretty cool. And now you're on to overdrive, so you have crunch and you have lead. The crunch channel is supposedly for your rhythms. And even kind of in the high gain mode, it's still not very overdriven. But being it's a 90 solid state amplifier, you're not really going to get very much of what you can consider a modern tone. The lead is built for your solos, but it's probably the most modern sounding channel on the amp. And another thing that I found really weird is there is no 3-band EQ, no parametric EQ, no real individualized tone shaping features on this amp. You have a contour, volume, reverb, and modulation. This is a chorus. It comes with a chorus. Let me get you a better look at that. It says chorus select. You switch it on manually, pardon my bad camera, by hitting this button, and then the depth and of the effect and the rate of the effect you can adjust this way. The contour is kind of unique. Instead of having your 3-band EQ, presence and resonance, the further that you move this, it changes your tone and everything about it. Definitely, I think from the lower standpoint, from 0, you have definitely reduced gain, definitely more vintage. And as you curve more to the right, you get more output and more gain. And on 10, you probably have about the maximum. And then you have the volume. And then, of course, you have a good digital reverb. I've just explained the chorus rate and depth, and I will demo that as well. And this is also something that's cool that you don't see anymore. This thing is absolutely all analog. So you have tape inputs to go straight into like a 4 or 8 track recorder or an audio tape machine in the studio. This would be the equivalent on a modern amplifier of an emulated line output. But it's just kind of cool to see those old, vintage type, tape inputs before there was digital anything. And then there's a preamp input and a power amp input. Actually, no, it's preamp output and power amp input. I'm not real clear on how to use those, but I'm assuming this is where you would kind of hook up to an external amplifier and use it like an additional cabinet. But I'm not so sure about the preamp. Maybe a bypass, and you can use another amp's preamp into this. And then, of course, you have a headphone socket, and then your power. And then you have your nice Fender logo here, and then J.A.M. So I've done some researching on this device because there seems to be some discrepancies about its RMS output. And a lot of people say that the J.A.M is a 25-watt amplifier, but read the back of your amps, guys. It is 75 watts. It is a 112 combo. It's kind of small for a 12-inch combo, but it's not bad. It actually is kind of loud. And it has one Fender custom 12-inch speaker in the back. And that's pretty much all there is to it. And there's your reverb tank right there. But that's it as far as the amp's appointments. So let's give this thing a spin. All right, before we get started with this review, I'm just going to tell you my signal path real quickly. It's pretty simple. It's just my 1960 Les Paul Tribute into the front of my Fender J.A.M. My humbucker bridge is engaged. I'm not using any coil splitting or tapping or anything like that to change the tone of my guitar throughout this review. It's just my bridge humbucker, volume about 7, tone about 7. And then we're going to go from the low gain input to the high gain input. For the clean channel stuff, I'm going to leave the contour on about 12 o'clock because it's not until we get into the overdriven channels that we actually see in depth how the contour control affects the sound. So with that being said, what everyone wants to know is, does it shred? conclusion, I'm going to list a few pros and cons about this amp, and then I'm going to leave the rest of it to you guys to decide what you think of it. The number one pro, in my opinion, is craftsmanship. This amp has definitely withstood the test of time. For it to be as old as it is and to sound as good as it does is truly a testament to the Fender legacy and to the quality and the kind of love that they put into this amp. Second being that it's lightweight. It's you can put it anywhere, you can carry it anywhere. It is just a great grab and go amp because some days I don't feel like messing with this guy and going through cables and carrying heads and cabs and just the whole 9 yards, especially after I've worked. This one's just a good go-to, go home, bounce ideas off of kind of amp. Great for the bedroom guitar player. Sounds great at low volumes. I wish I could have turned it up a little bit more, but I live in a shared living space and I don't want anyone killing me. But it does hold up rather well. It has a high, in my opinion, a very high integrity of the sound detail, even at a low volume. And this is actually one of the only solid state amplifiers that I've had, probably the only solid state amplifier that I've had that actually sounded good with headphones on. Usually when you have a practice amp with a headphone out, what you get out of your headphone speakers is nothing near like what comes out of the front speaker. It's really muddy and dark and muffled. This really retains most of its original sound through the headphones, and you don't find that. You really don't find that, at least not in my experience. So that's just another piece of what Fender put into there and the kind of time and precision they actually put into it. And another thing being the chorus. I don't know if you guys heard this as clearly as I did, but that chorus was super responsive, super detailed, and it actually sounded like something that would have came out of a pedal or a multi-effects processor. It's just a really high grade, a very surprisingly high grade chorus from a built-in amplifier. And again, age knows no limit when it comes to this thing. It's just, it sounds just as fresh as if you bought like a Digitech effects processor and used its own chorus. It sounds almost the same. So to have that high grade chorus inside of a 90s Fender solid state to me is beyond impressive. Another pro in my opinion is the dedicated inputs. The low gain input and the high gain input are super responsive. The moment that I plugged into that low gain input, it brought the dynamics of everything down. It kind of acted like an attenuator, and it brought down the dynamics and the volume, but still kept the integrity of the sound. It still had every ounce of the punch and the gain that you would have had on the high gain, input, but it brought it down and it didn't squash it. It didn't make it sterile like a lot of other amps have done with their low gain inputs. It still retains the character and sound quality, and then you plug it into the high gain input, and then you just get the next level of gain staging, the punch and the volume, but it still sounds like the same amp, and the harmonics and all the details were just as good. So I give Fender, really big props on that. That wasn't something I really expected out of this amp. Now on to the cons. Number one being it's got general solid state issues. And what I mean by that is in my opinion, you can't bring this to a full band practice and expect to be heard. I did bring this out in a band practice once when my drummer was still in town. We put it up on top of the dresser, and honestly, during the first few minutes of the practice, I wasn't heard. So I had to dime the volume and the contour. And honestly, at high volumes, even before I used the contour, my saturation went to nothing. Whereas you have this full distorted sound at lower volumes. Once you start turning up that volume, your saturation just goes to nothing. It's like it goes from clean to a louder clean. And so I started adding the contour thinking I would be adding gain. So I equalized it. I dimed both the contour and the volume at the same time, thinking I would get that gain back at that volume, but I never did. And then the contour at that level of volume becomes useless because it didn't add any kind of gain. It didn't add any kind of structure to the sound. It was just a loud, clean. with a little bit of fuzz on the edge of it, and it sounded nothing like it did in the video. And that's not the only solid state amp I've had do that. I've had a custom quad 200 GFX, and then I just turned it up to play with another guitar player, and each time that I did that, that overdriven tone, the saturation that I had at a lower volume just dissipated, and it didn't matter how I turned the gain. It just was just like this really loud, grainy, trebly clean with a little fuzz on it. So the only solid state amplifier that I've had that didn't do that was my Marshall Valve State, but as the name implies, it does have two 12AX7 tubes in the preamp, which probably attributes for it not losing its sound at high volumes. If you want to bring this to a band practice with a drummer and the full ensemble, you are going to need, in my opinion, two overdrive pedals, one for your main overdriven rhythm channel, and then another one as a clean boost for your leads. Otherwise, you are not going to be heard. Even with the volume being dimed like it was, I had to stand directly in front of my amplifier for me to even hear a little bit of what I was playing, and even then it wasn't great. So this is not, just absolutely not the amp for a full band practice. And the other negative being there's no foot switch. So this is not as versatile of an amp as I would like it to be. You can't switch from clean to overdrive with a foot switch. There's no jack for it. There's no external control that you can even use for it. So for a guitarist like me that wants a lot of versatility, that wants independent channel changing, this is not the amp. I mean, you have to literally play in one mode at a time. And if you want to switch the mode that you're playing in, you have to just lean over and hit the individual channels like they were. The effects are non-foot switchable. You have to lean over and press the buttons. So I find that to be a pretty big con, because, for an amp with such features, there just needs to be a way to dial them on command, and there just isn't. Another con being the lack of independent gain controls. I feel that this amp is extremely limited because there is no bass, middle, treble, presence, resonance, gain. It's just one control, a contour, and then it just dictates everything when you roll it. And I don't think that's such a great thing, because, again, if you need a little extra mid boost, if you need a little extra low end, if you're not exactly happy with the sound that you have, you're screwed. I mean, it's just what it is. As I think the cleans were good, but when it comes to overdrive, I think that this was more of an American sounding amp, especially the further you turn the contour. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just an observation. I think they were trying to go after a more of an American, a rectified boogie/Randall kind of sound, the more gain that you put in. But I do feel that the gain on this amplifier is very generic. So in that sense, that I don't like the overdrive and the fact that I think it sounds cheap. But other than that, I mean, it's got great effects. It's got great build quality. It's got great staying power. I mean, I believe you are hard pressed to find an amp that's going to last this long right now. Other than that, in my opinion, does it shred? I think so. What do you guys think? Does it shred? Does it not shred? Do you want more gear reviews like this? If so, please like, share, and comment below, and I will do more gear reviews like this. But until then, I've been Mark. You've been great. Have a great day.